So today we're talking to Thomi Glover, management consultant, priest, and so much more. Hello, Thomi.
The leadership I'm passionate about is personal and organizational leadership that allows us, encourages us, enables us to be everything we can be in the world, because that's what the world needs. The very first teaching job I ever had, which was a program for adults who dropped out of school and needed to get high school equivalency to go and do trade training. This was in Ontario, in Toronto. And many of them were recovering addicts. And to work with them was a real privilege. And it was a kind of leadership, helping them to take charge, be leaders in their own lives. And I think that's how it all started. I had the good fortune to get a job with Finning Tractor when I first went to Vancouver. And it was in their training division. And that was a place where they were the licensed distributors of really fine leadership and sales and management products that were created by people like Wilson Learning Corporation, Kettner Trigo, and I got licensed in all of those things, learned a tremendous amount, and in the application of what we were selling and implementing, discovered that I had a passion for this, which wasn't completely surprising because I'd had a career as a high school teacher and in graduate school and university and did lots and lots of teaching and loved it and knew that I did it really well. Well, that's just a different kind of leadership. Suddenly, there was an advertisement, a call for faculty for the Royal Roads University School of Leadership Studies. And I looked at the way the thing was worded. I thought, I could do that. So I applied and got hired. And it was a terrific opportunity because I was working with all kinds of other people who were equally passionate about leadership, bringing different kinds of focus to their piece. Mine was the personal leadership piece. And that's when I started actively coaching. The very best opportunity I ever had as a priest was to go to the Philippines for 2 years and be an executive officer of an international school with 750 students, 26 different languages, and it was a school affiliated with the Episcopal Church of the Philippines, and I was there as the chaplain and a member of the executive team. And it was the best job I ever had, best boss I ever had. He was he'd begun as a Roman Catholic priest, went out to the Philippines with a teaching order from Belgium, ran off with one of his students and got married. And so that did end his career in the Roman Catholic Church. And ultimately he was, as he said, well, I eventually got laundered and received into the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Church in the Philippines. And he was a passionate educator. I went out for an exposure trip and a visit, and John said, you absolutely have to meet Gabriel Dimanche. John had met him at the local expat church, Episcopal Church, and so he arranged for me to be invited to the school and to spend better part of a day. And Gabby and I walked around and talked about education and talked about the church and talked about justice and all these things. And as I was leaving, he said, if you ever would contemplate coming back here to live for a while. I want to talk to you about being the chaplain and executive officer in the school. And I thought he was just being really gracious, and I thanked him for it. When John came home after me and said, I think you can expect an offer to come, and these days it was fax from the Philippines, and I said, well, that's not possible, because I met the bishop and he made it very clear that he did not approve of the ordination of women. And John just laughed and said, well, I happen to know that Dimanche has your license, and the offer is on its way. I can remember doing an incredibly fine course with Dominic Crossan. He was a Roman Catholic priest, a scholar, and the very first day of class, somebody had the nerve to ask him, well, I wouldn't have done so, because he's got real presence. So what happened to you? And I can't remember what the issue was, but it had something to do with interpretation and church doctrine and towing the line. And he really had an argument with his bishop. And he said at the end of the argument, I was no longer a member of the order. I think he'd been a Benedictine, but I'm not sure. He was a monastic anyway. And I was no longer a priest. And so then I became a full-time scholar. And he was fabulous.
The picture that is painted in all of this of the newborn is most interesting. This innocent being with perceptions in some ways greater than ours, because there's no assumptions, there's just all wow.
No filters.
No filters, right? Is confronted with a world where they are placed under great duress. And an example somebody quoted was, you're hungry, it's at night and it's dark, and there's nobody there to help you. And so it is a nightmare situation. And you get up in your crib and start screaming. Right? And if mummy doesn't wake up for 20 minutes, you've got 20 minutes of panic there.
Absolute terror.
And you can see how a being in that situation is desperate to find, how do I stop this from happening again? What do I have to do to be safe in this situation? And safe is a key word in all of this, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Safety is what we're searching for. And it's clear from what the attunement that you're talking about, that we each come up with different solutions to our own different
and we start out with either, so I had this expectation of achievement. Well, there was no physical consequence of that. It was all mental, emotional stuff. Think about a child born into a family where there is physical violence, verbal abuse. There's an awful lot of families like that. And think about the fact that in utero, they're already picking up that energy, and then they're born into that. I read of a situation where a young person, I think about age 2, decided not to talk anymore because the environment was so reactive and potentially explosive that the only way to protect herself was to be as invisible as possible, including not talking. She found her voice eventually, very emphatically. But,
to talk about myself for a moment, I was moderately bright at school. And in those days in England, you got marks. And also said, what position are you in the class?
mm-hmm.
And I remember I came home with my report card. I was third in the class. And I showed my dad, expecting encouragement. Instead of which, he looked coldly at me and said, why weren't you number one?
Your father and my father could have been good buddies. I came home one day. My father had been a classic scholar before the military life. I came home with a 97 in Latin. My father said, what happened to the other 3 marks? Now, he probably thought he had a very sarcastic bent, and he might have thought he was being funny. But it was like you, I was just crushed. Absolutely crushed.
Well, the point, maybe something similar happened to you, but for me that was a turning point, because I thought, even coming third, I can't get his approval, right? And I remember the turmoil inside, just all these horrible feelings, and that was the moment that I said, I know, I can just not care. And I just turned on the not care switch, which I used there ever after. I don't care. And for me, caring about things is actually, I have to make a conscious decision to turn that switch on, because my default is the planet's going to hell. I don't care, right? And it's because it worked so well in that situation. That was one of my attunements.
Exactly. That was a formative, emotional experience that created a behavior and a reaction.
Life is one of such achievement, one thing after another, company, program, church, and you I think you attribute that to having to achieve something to make your father pay attention.
There's the connection between attunement, the patterns that we learn in infancy, and how those patterns then shape a whole lot of what we do, for better or worse. And it was a mixed blessing for me. I mean, there was General Thomas Kellett, my father, for whom achievement was everything. And it was only way, way later, after he had died, been dead for some time, that I learned enough about him to understand why he was the way he was. I just had to put up with the way he was. And I have memories of being only 2 years old and doing things that he'd set me to do, and really needing to do them well, because that was recognition, that was approval. For me, that was safety. And so that shaped a whole lot, some of which was really, really difficult, because we moved and moved and moved, and every time I went to a new school, there I was in a whole new environment, and the only thing I knew how to do was to prove myself by achieving whatever. I expect I was the most obnoxious, precocious, pushy little girl, and ultimately maybe even into my teens. So on the one hand, it has served me very, very well. And on the other hand, when I'm under stress, the go-to response for me, and this really drops into the emotional intelligence piece, is I got to make stuff happen. And if I've got a project, I am just going to be driving that project come hell or high water, because that's how I soothe myself. And John has been known to say, Attila the hen could leave now. I know that under stress, I go way independent. And then, if that doesn't work, I'm out of here.
Mm.
And I can think of lots of examples in my life. I have to really struggle to get out of the glass half empty because of all of the uncertainty that I had to live with growing up. And that has made me very wary a lot of my life.
This just occurs to me, the word for what you love doing is retuning, isn't it?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, I like that. No, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And I think about a tuning fork, trying to tune an instrument.
Yes.
It's a slow process and hard to get right. And then when you do, it's really exciting. I don't think anybody would deny that the last 2 years have created huge levels of stress for a great many people. Under stress, we become more accentuated versions of who we are. But there's a lot of death out there and a lot of illness. And when we confront those kinds of things, that sort of drastic change, for many people, that drives a kind of inner reflection, a realization that none of us are immortal. And if there are some things that are important to me to do and be, I better get on with them now. Zoom and related things, but I just call it the Zoom revolution, has been a mixed blessing. It has taken a phenomenal toll on people. The one of my clients has said she's exhausted because people they look at your calendar and book Zoom meetings back to back to back to back. She said, at least when we were, in the flesh, you got the 5-minute break between meetings, or you could go and get a coffee or something. She said, now it's just relentless. And initially it didn't seem quite so grim, but it's been absolutely physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausting. Now that has a huge impact on trying to be compassionate. I mean, she's in an industry where compassion is critical. To stay sharp, to make the right kind of decisions in the appropriate time frame. And I was puzzling about this, and suddenly there was this wonderful article in The Economist, and it was about communication in your face and the challenges about that. Because historically, if someone is, think about how we use that expression, it's in your face. Somebody's in your face, they're close up. And as the article said, when somebody's that close, what goes on in our brain is to wonder, well, is this an invitation to a kiss or a punch in the face? And our primal brain, our lizard brain that sits way back here, that's the fight or flight place, it just goes into high gear all the time. One of the things that's happening is more and more we've been living on high alert. And if you think about, pre-Neanderthal men, go way back to our origins, way, way back. It was extremely important to be on alert all the time because you didn't know when the woolly mammoth was likely to come storming out of whatever and come after you. And so you lived in that fight or flight place. And there wasn't much language. And so the brain that you functioned from was this lizard brain at the back. The frontal cortex develops way, way later. Good thing it does, because that's where reasoning lives, language lives, all that stuff. But what happens when we are suddenly frightened is, boom, we go back to lizard brain. And there's no capacity to really think and reason there, and you have to learn to calm down long enough that you get out of that back into the place where you can actually think rationally about anything. One of the things that we know is that the very best way for anybody to improve their resilience, to manage their fear or their anger or whatever, is by increasing the amount of joy in their lives. And so what gives us joy then becomes important, and making sure that we make that part of our lives. The ground's too wet, but I have a golf mat out here, a practice mat. And that has been the way I have filled my joy bucket for months and months and months and months and months. And there was no point thinking about going to a golf course. Everything was dried out anyway, and there was COVID and so on. But I could get out there and whack golf balls and feel like $1 million. Part of what gave me joy was watching the balls go further and further, until I could, with my lovely hybrid 7 wood, they go flying over the fence and halfway up the hill. Thank God there's a big hill, because the neighbor's house is at the top. And
so you've been sending golf balls into your neighbour's yard?
I have been sending golf balls into my neighbor's yard. And John came back one day. He had decided to go pick some up for me, and he came in. His pockets were bulging. He said, "I've picked up 12 golf balls." I said, "Oh, that's really good." The frustration is I can't use my driver out there. God knows where the ball would go. I have, not surprisingly, from my early attunement, an orientation to the glass half empty. Well, that is a painful way to live. And I really have to work at not going there. And so one of the things that I do is regularly I'm an inveterate journalist. I have stacks of journals. But just do some gratitude journaling. When I find myself going in that downward spiral, whoa, I got to turn this around. So what's going on for which I'm grateful, that makes me happy, that might even give me joy? Write it down. Name it to tame it is one of the things I've picked up along the way, and I use with clients a lot. Just write it down and make it concrete. What is I'm grateful for, that almost automatically starts to dilute something that has got me going and made me angry. What's so interesting for me and many others in the field about what's called emotional intelligence and relationship intelligence is that we can learn about ourselves and how we respond under stress, so that we can at least understand what's happening, and hopefully, when we're prepared to, manage ourselves, learn to do things differently. Was there another way that I might have done that? What might have happened if I were to choose to do something differently? as far as what I'm hoping to do ongoing for me, it's to have the opportunity to do as much of that kind of work as I can.
So you're not going to retire?
Oh, heavens no, I'd be bored to death. So it's not only that it would be boring, it would be a huge waste of so much of what I've spent all of my adult life doing in one way or another. That would be almost irresponsible.
Well, thank you, Thomi, very much for this conversation. It's been fantastic, and I think a lot of people will enjoy watching this.